I'm Emily Parker, 30 years old, and I can still remember the taste of cold coffee and humiliation the day my father called my career filthy. The family meeting had that same sterile perfection every Parker gathering did: crystal glasses, pressed shirts, a table that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I had walked in hoping maybe this time would be different, that maybe they'd see the life I'd built outside their marble walls. But the moment I saw my father's jaw tighten, I knew I was wrong. His words cut through the air before dessert was even served, and with every syllable the room seemed to grow smaller, colder, quieter. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to prove your worth when someone refused to see it. I grew up in a house that worshipped appearances. My father built his fortune in finance and measured success in suit salaries and social circles. My mother moved through the world like a photograph, always smiling, always composed, careful, never to wrinkle the peace he demanded. My sister Abby fit perfectly into that picture. By 12, she was already playing piano for charity galas, collecting medals, and learning to speak the polished language of ambition. I, on the other hand, was usually barefoot in the backyard with a second-hand camera in my hand, chasing light through the branches. Photography was never just a hobby to me. It was how I made sense of things: the way sunlight touched fur, how rain beaded on glass, how life moved quietly when nobody was watching. My father used to joke that I'd grow out of rolling in the dirt. He said it at dinners in front of guests with that sharp laugh that made everyone else follow along. I learned to smile to pretend I didn't care, even when every word left a small bruise somewhere deep. When I got into a documentary photography program in New York, it felt like I had finally found a doorway into the life I wanted. I had a scholarship that covered most of my tuition, but I needed help with housing. I remember sliding the acceptance letter across the table, trying to keep my voice steady while my heart raced with hope. My father barely looked at it. "You picked the dirt," he said. "Live in it." My mother stared at her plate. Abby laughed softly. That was the first time I realized love in our family came with terms and signatures. So I packed up my life into 2 suitcases and moved into a tiny studio in Queens. I waited tables at night, interned at a rescue shelter by day, and took pictures of animals that nobody else wanted to look at: one-eyed dogs, limping cats, the forgotten ones. It smelled like bleach and wet fur, and I loved it. I saved every spare dollar for lenses and film. There were nights I came home so tired I couldn't feel my fingers, but when I developed those photos in the darkroom, watching images bloom slowly into existence, it felt like breathing again. Years passed quietly. My sister became a lawyer, my father retired to golf and investments, and I stayed invisible. Holidays were polite but distant. I brought gifts. They brought judgment. My mother always said, "Don't provoke your father." So I didn't. I smiled, kept my camera tucked away, and told half-truths about what I did. Sometimes I thought if I stayed small enough, they'd stop seeing me as a disappointment. But life outside their world grew brighter. My work started to get noticed: small brands asking for photos, local shelters featuring my images. I launched a YouTube channel, Wild Grace, where I posted tutorials and little behind-the-scenes clips from the field. People connected with the honesty of it: no filters, no perfection, just the real mess and beauty of the wild. When one of my rescue videos went viral, everything changed. Sponsorships came in. I opened a summer workshop in Vermont. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was building something. Still, I never said a word to my family. When I came home for Thanksgiving that year, Abby announced she'd bought a condo downtown. My father beamed proud of her real career. I sat quietly passing the cranberry sauce, not mentioning that one of my photo spreads had just been featured by National Geographic. I thought about showing him the article, but instead I smiled and listened to him praise everyone but me. Later that night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, realizing that even success couldn't buy belonging. So when the message came about the family meeting everyone's expected, big announcement, I didn't expect warmth, but I went anyway. I even brought something with me: a framed photo of a lioness I'd captured in Tanzania, sunlight caught in her eyes, strength and grace in the same breath. I thought maybe it could be a bridge, a silent way of saying, "Look, I've made something that matters." But that night in that immaculate living room, with its glass decanters and practiced smiles, I learned that bridges only work when someone's willing to meet you halfway. And my father, he never was. The house looked exactly as I remembered: symmetrical hedges, white columns, windows so clean they reflected the sky like mirrors. Inside it smelled faintly of lemon polish and money. Abby was already there, sitting by the window with a tall glass of something pink. Her nails were perfect, her posture even more so. She glanced up when I walked in and offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father stood by the fireplace, swirling a tumbler of whiskey as if preparing for a board meeting. My mother adjusted the cheese platter again and again, pretending not to notice me standing there. I sat near the edge of the couch, clutching the framed lioness photo I'd brought. My father's voice filled the room. "Everyone, let's gather in the living room," he said, as if he were announcing quarterly results instead of a family moment. Abby moved to the center of attention without being asked. My mother dabbed her eyes with a folded tissue. I couldn't tell if they were tears of pride or habit. Then my father cleared his throat and smiled for the first time that evening. "We're proud to announce that Abby will be launching her own real estate firm. To support this new venture, we'll be transferring a significant investment from the family account." The clapping that followed was automatic. Mother's delicate, father's steady, Abby's demure and rehearsed. I didn't move. I looked from one face to another, waiting for someone to glance in my direction, to include me somehow. When no one did, I lifted my hand slightly. "Does this include any support for me?" My father's expression hardened. "You," he said, his voice sharp enough to slice through the air. "You've chosen your path, Emily. Mudbugs, barking dogs, whatever it is you do, that's not a business. It's a hobby at best, filthy at worst." The room fell silent. Abby's lips curved faintly a smile she didn't bother to hide. I unwrapped the frame in my lap and held it out to him. "This photograph will be featured in next month's National Geographic," I said quietly. "I thought you might want to hang it in your office." He didn't even glance at it. "Take that out of my house," he said, his voice cold and steady. Then he set his glass down and added, "And while you're at it, pack your things. I want you gone tonight." For a moment, no one moved. My mother looked at the floor. Abby adjusted her bracelet. I waited for someone to speak, but the silence was complete. I stood the frame still in my hands and walked upstairs to gather what little I had left there: a box of old prints, a sweater, a few books from college. On my way out, I placed the lioness photo on the entry table beneath the family portrait that had never included me. Then I left. The night air felt colder than I remembered. I drove to the train station in silence, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than they needed to. The station lights cast long shadows on the pavement, and when the train pulled in, I climbed aboard without looking back. The ride to Vermont was quiet, except for the hum of steel on steel and the muted conversations of strangers. I pressed my forehead against the window and watched the towns blur past. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The pain wasn't sharp. It was heavy, like a truth that had been waiting for years to be spoken aloud. When I reached my apartment, I dropped my bag by the door and walked straight to the dark room. I switched on the red light and stood in the stillness that always felt safe. The smell of developer and vinegar filled the air. I chose a negative I'd been meaning to print: an owl, mid-flight, wings spread against a blur of trees. As the image emerged on the paper, I felt something steady inside me begin to return. It wasn't peace yet, but it was close. The next morning, I was back in the woods before sunrise. The fall workshop had 6 students that season, all bundled in thick coats and still half asleep as we stood ankle-deep in dew, waiting for the light to break through the trees. "Patience," I told them. "Good photographs wait for good light." We laughed softly when the birds didn't show, and when they did, we worked until our fingers were numb. By noon, the forest had warmed, and I remembered why I loved this life: because it was honest. Because no one in these woods cared about last names or investment accounts. At night, I edited footage, replied to comments, and sorted through sponsorship emails I could once only dream of. A camera brand wanted to collaborate on a wildlife series. Another offered to produce a short documentary about my workshops. The messages came faster than I could answer them. I didn't tell anyone at home. Weeks passed, and the silence from them stretched longer than ever before. No apologies, no questions, not even a stray text from my mother. It was as if I'd been erased completely and oddly, that emptiness felt like space to breathe. One evening, the first snow of the season began to fall. I stood by the window with a glass of wine, watching the flakes drift through the porch light. The world outside looked soft, untouched. I whispered to no one, "This peace is expensive but worth every penny," then turned off my phone and let the quiet settle in. Winter arrived in full, and with it came new milestones I never celebrated publicly. My channel passed 1 million subscribers. The workshop sold out months in advance. A book deal arrived in my inbox, and I signed it at my kitchen table without ceremony. I ordered a chocolate cake from the bakery down the street, wrote "Untamed Light" in frosting, and ate a slice alone while snow piled against the window pane. There was no applause, no toast, just the faint sound of the heater and the soft rhythm of the wind. Sometimes late at night, I'd wonder if my father still believed I'd fail, if he pictured me crawling back in defeat. Instead, I was thriving, quietly building a life that no one in that house would ever have imagined for me. And though I didn't say it out loud, part of me was grateful that I'd finally been pushed out. Some doors need to close for peace to walk in. Still, I couldn't have predicted how quickly that peace would be interrupted. It started with a call I almost didn't answer, his name flashing on my screen after months of silence. The one person who'd told me to get out of his house was about to ask for something far bigger than I could have imagined. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the call came. I had just finished filming a segment about winter tracking techniques and was pouring hot cider into a chipped mug when my phone lit up with his name. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, that familiar mix of surprise and hesitation tightening in my chest. I hadn't heard his voice since the night he threw me out. I could have ignored it, but curiosity, or maybe habit, made me answer. "Emily," he said. No greeting, no warmth. Just my name, steady but strained. His voice sounded older, thinner somehow, with a weight behind it that wasn't there before. "Yes," I replied, keeping my tone even. There was a pause long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he cleared his throat. "We need your help." I stayed silent, waiting. "It's your sister," he continued. "She's in trouble. Her business, those real estate projects, one of her partners disappeared, and now she's facing lawsuits. She's going to lose everything unless we act quickly." The number came next, flat and unapologetic. $100,000. For a second, all I could hear was the quiet hum of my heater. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He exhaled through the phone, a controlled sound he'd probably practiced before dialing. "Because you've done well. I've seen your videos, your studio. You've built something impressive. We're proud of you." The word "proud" landed like a stone in cold water. I almost laughed, but it came out more like breath. "You called my work filthy," I said softly. "You told me to get out of your house." There was a faint rustle on the other end. Maybe him shifting in his chair, maybe guilt. "That was 5 months ago," he said, his voice tightening. "And now I'm suddenly your daughter again because you need something I asked." The silence stretched thin between us. When he spoke again, the sharp edge of authority had returned. "Don't be like this, Emily. This is about family. Your sister's drowning." I let the words settle before answering. "Then maybe she should learn how to swim." His tone hardened. "Are you really going to let your own sister lose everything because your feelings were hurt?" My hand trembled slightly as I held the phone, but my voice stayed steady. "No," I said. "I'm going to let her face the consequences of the life you helped her build." Before he could respond, I ended the call. The silence that followed didn't feel empty this time. It felt clean. 2 mornings later, a knock startled me awake. It was sharp and urgent, the kind that doesn't wait long for an answer. The clock read 6:45. No one came by that early, not deliveries, not neighbors. I hesitated before pulling back the curtain. There they were, my father, my mother, and Abby, standing in the snow, bundled in coats, faces pale against the morning light. I opened the door, only halfway blocking the entrance with my shoulder. "Why are you here?" I asked. Abby stepped forward first, clutching her purse as though it might anchor her. "Emily, please, just hear us out." Her voice trembled, the practiced confidence gone. My mother's eyes were red, her hands twisting her scarf. My father stood behind them, silent and stiff. "We're desperate," my mother said quietly. "The banks are threatening action. The lawsuits, they're serious." I nodded once. I heard. Abby wiped her nose with a shaky hand. I messed up, okay. I thought I could handle it. I didn't think it would all fall apart so fast. I folded my arms. Like you thought you could handle mocking me at every holiday dinner for 10 years. She blinked hard. That's not fair. It's accurate, I said. Every joke, every smirk, every time you treated my work like dirt, you meant it. My father finally spoke. Enough. This isn't about old grievances. This is about family. You don't abandon blood. I looked at him. You did. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. The air between us felt brittle, like the cold itself might crack if anyone breathed too loudly. I'm still your sister, Abby said, her voice small. And I'm sorry. For a moment, the memory of that night at the house flashed her sitting there sipping her drink, smiling, while I was told to leave. I took a slow breath. I forgave you all a long time ago, I said. But forgiveness doesn't mean rescue. Her eyes filled, but I didn't look away. You have the money, she whispered. This wouldn't even dent your income. I nodded once. And that's exactly why I won't give it to you. Because to you, I'm not a sister. I'm a bank account. No, my mother said, shaking her head. You're our daughter. Only when it's convenient, I replied. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of snow and the sound of distant crows. My father's breath came out hard. You'll regret this, Emily, he said. I stepped back, my hand on the door. If you're looking for a savior, I said quietly, ask the daughter you chose. Then I closed the door, slow and final. For a long time, I didn't move. The sound of the car starting drifted through the window. I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the tire tracks fade beneath falling snow. There was no triumph in it, no satisfaction, just stillness. For once, I didn't feel like I was losing something. I felt like I'd finally stopped bleeding for people who never noticed the wound. Days passed without another call. I returned to my routine filming, editing, teaching. The workshop in Vermont filled quickly, the studio stayed busy, and life moved forward. At night, I still caught myself glancing at my phone, half expecting another message, another plea. None came. I thought maybe that was the end of it. Maybe finally silence could mean peace. But peace, I would learn, is fragile. It doesn't always shatter loudly. Sometimes it unravels slowly, one cruel word at a time. 3 days passed before the silence broke, but not in the way I expected. That morning, I opened my laptop to check my emails. The subject lines came in waves, first confusion, then accusation, then cruelty. You abandoned your family. Money changes people. Your sister deserved better. My inbox was flooded with messages from strangers. At first, I thought it was spam, until I saw a familiar name in one of the messages, a former workshop student. The email said, Emily, I thought you should see this, followed by a screenshot. My heart sank before I even clicked. There it was, a Facebook post from Abby. Her profile picture, smiling and flawless as ever, sat beside a long, emotional caption. It's painful to share this, but I have no other choice. My sister Emily Parker has become successful and wealthy, but refused to help our family in a time of crisis. We begged, we cried. She shut the door in our faces. I still love her, but I don't recognize her anymore. Below it were hundreds of comments. People I didn't know had taken sides. Some called her brave for speaking out. Others called me heartless. I scrolled through the words until they blurred into a wall of anger and disbelief. I closed the laptop, but it was too late. The noise had already escaped the screen. That afternoon, Mia walked into the studio holding her phone. Is everything okay? She asked gently. I tried to answer, but the words stuck. She handed me the phone anyway. Emily, look. On our studio's Instagram page, under a recent post of a rescued fox, the comments had turned vicious. Hope the fox knows you're heartless. Fake nature girl. You profit off kindness, but abandon your blood. My throat went dry. Mia whispered, Do you want me to turn off comments? I shook my head. Not yet, but my hands were trembling. I sat down at my desk and stared at the framed lioness photo, my own quiet symbol of strength, and wondered how quickly truth could be drowned out by a prettier lie. By evening, 3 sponsors had emailed to pause collaborations. A camera company I'd partnered with for 2 years wrote that they were reevaluating brand alignment. Even a local wildlife charity asked to delay our joint event until things settled. Each message felt like a small door closing. I spent the next few days in a fog of exhaustion. I barely slept. My channel analytics dropped sharply, sponsorships froze, and bookings for my winter workshops were suddenly canceled. By the 5th day, the financial loss was no longer just emotional, it was measurable. When Raj called, I almost didn't pick up. "Emily," he said, voice steady, "we need to talk." We met that evening at a quiet cafe off Main Street. He arrived with a folder of printed screenshots and a laptop. I watched him scroll silently for several minutes before he looked up. "This is defamation," he said flatly. "Not opinion defamation with documented loss. Sponsors, clients' revenue, all traceable." I kept my hands around my mug, the heat grounding me. "She's my sister," I said. Raj nodded. "And she turned your reputation into her lifeline. You don't have to go to court, but you have every legal right to." The snow outside had begun to fall heavier, covering the streetlights in white halos. I thought about Abby's words online about my father standing silent behind her, and the years of quiet dismissal before that. It wasn't an accident, it was habit. It was the way they kept me small. I took a slow breath and met Raj's eyes. "Draft the lawsuit." He didn't smile. He just nodded once and said, "I'll file Monday." The weeks that followed felt unreal. The case drew whispers, online speculation from followers who had once been kind. Some apologized for judging too quickly. Others stayed silent. I didn't respond to any of it. I poured everything into my work, filming tutorials, editing videos, running the studio as if nothing was happening. Mia was the one who kept things steady. She answered calls, managed cancellations, and reminded me to eat when I forgot. When I'd linger too long by the window, she'd say softly, "Don't let them take more than they already have." 6 weeks later, the court date arrived. The courtroom wasn't dramatic. No flashing cameras, no shouting, just pale walls, polished floors, and the hum of quiet voices. Abby sat at the opposite table wearing a navy suit that looked one size too large. She kept her eyes down. My parents weren't there. Raj spoke calmly, walking the judge through every exhibit, screenshots of Abby's posts, the avalanche of shares, my canceled contracts, the analytics showing a steep dip in earnings. His voice never rose, but his words carried weight. "These aren't opinions," he said. "They're accusations that cost my client her livelihood." Abby's attorney tried to argue that it had been a personal plea, not malice. But the evidence was clear. Intent didn't matter more than impact, and the impact was undeniable. When the ruling came, it was brief and final. Abby was ordered to pay damages and issue a full public retraction across every platform, $147,000 in restitution. No appeals, no excuses. I didn't look at her when the judge read the decision. I couldn't. The sound of the gavel echoed once sharp and clean. When it was over, people began filing out quietly. Raj turned to me. "Do you want a statement prepared for the press?" I shook my head. "No need." Outside, the air was bright and cold, the kind of cold that bites at your cheeks but clears your head. Snow covered the courthouse steps untouched except for a few footprints. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the stillness. The silence felt different now, no longer the kind that followed pain, but the kind that followed truth. That night, I walked the trail behind my studio. The trees were heavy with snow, the ground soft beneath my boots. The sky glowed faintly, the moon hidden but near. There was no triumph in me, no thrill, just something cleaner than either of those. A quiet release. When I returned home, a letter waited in my mailbox. The handwriting on the envelope was my mother's. Inside, a single page. "I wish things had gone differently. Your father is angry. Abby has moved back in. There's silence in every room. I hope someday we can find our way back, but I know it's not your job to fix us." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, not to forget, but to keep. Some words are meant to rest in quiet places. I didn't know if the family I lost would ever heal, but for the first time, I understood something I never had before. Peace doesn't always come from being forgiven. Sometimes it comes from refusing to carry what broke you. The next morning I brewed coffee, opened the curtains, and let the light in. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was pale blue, the kind that promised a thaw. I had survived the storm, and whatever came next, I knew it would be mine to choose. It had been nearly a month since the ruling, and life was beginning to settle again. My channel recovered slowly. Brands returned one by one, and the comments under my posts grew kind again. The noise faded, replaced by the quiet rhythm I'd built filming in the mornings, editing through the afternoons, teaching workshops on weekends. The court case was behind me, but the distance between my family and me felt deeper than ever. Still, I didn't regret drawing that line. The letter from my mother stayed tucked in the drawer of my desk. Sometimes I caught myself opening it, tracing the neat handwriting, wondering if she'd meant every word. There was no anger left in me, just a kind of stillness that comes when you stop hoping for apologies. I thought that peace would last longer than it did. It was late January when the next call came. I was setting up lights for a product shoot when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it ring out, but habit made me answer. "Is this Emily Parker?" The voice was male professional. "This is Deputy Marshal from the county office. We're calling to confirm a report you filed concerning online harassment." My heart skipped. "Yes, that's right," he continued. "We're following up on new complaints. It seems your sister's posts were shared again last week by a third-party account. We're coordinating with your attorney for next steps." I thanked him, hung up, and immediately opened my laptop. Sure enough, there it was. Abby's old post re-uploaded by an anonymous page under a different name, same captions, same photos. The comments had started again, though smaller this time. I sent the screenshots to Raj. His reply came within minutes, already on it. "Don't respond publicly." I shut the computer and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling until the spinning fan blades came into focus. I wasn't angry, just tired. I wanted to move forward, but the past kept clawing its way back through other people's screens. That night, I stayed at the studio late. The snow outside glowed under the lamplight, soft and pale. Mia had gone home hours earlier, leaving the space quiet, except for the low hum of the heater. I made tea, turned on some soft music, and opened a folder of wildlife photos from my last trip. As I worked, I realized something I hadn't taken a break in years. Every milestone, every setback I had handled by working harder. Maybe it was time to stop running on survival and start living again. The next morning I booked a weekend trip to Maine. Just a small cabin near the coast, nothing fancy. 3 days of silence, ocean air, and no Wi-Fi. It felt like permission to exhale. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, no posts, no messages. I left my phone off for the entire drive. The first night there, I stood on the porch listening to the waves crash against the rocks. The air was sharp with salt and pine. I thought about my father's voice calling me filthy, about Abby's tears on my doorstep, about my mother's letter written in careful regret. For years I had fought to earn their respect, and for once I didn't need it. The only validation I wanted came from the steady beat of my own heart. When I returned home 3 days later, I found an envelope taped to my studio door, my name written in my father's handwriting. I stood there a long moment before opening it. Inside were 2 sheets of paper, one typed, one handwritten. The typed one was from his lawyer, an acknowledgement of the court's final settlement payment. The handwritten note was short. "Emily, I hope this closes the matter. Your mother wanted to come by, but I told her not to. We'll be in Florida for the winter. Take care of yourself." No apology, no warmth, just closure, the kind my father understood. I folded the note once and placed it with my mother's letter. 2 pieces of paper, 2 very different kinds of silence. The weeks that followed were quiet again. The studio thrived, my students returned, and a small publishing house offered to turn my wildlife essays into a photo memoir. I said yes without hesitation. It felt like the right next step, not to prove anything, but to record what mattered. Then, one evening in early spring, Mia knocked on my office door, her face pale. "Emily," she said softly, "you might want to see this." She held out her phone. On the screen was a post from a local news outlet, an interview with Abby. The headline read, "I lost everything but found myself. How one woman is rebuilding after family estrangement." I scrolled quickly, reading the article. Abby talked about public humiliation and rebuilding from betrayal. She didn't name me directly, but the implication was obvious. My name didn't have to appear for people to connect the dots. The comment section filled instantly, some defending me, others attacking again. I felt a slow, dull ache in my chest. Not anger this time, just a deep fatigue. I closed the screen and handed the phone back to Mia. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Please don't engage." She nodded, her eyes searching mine for a reaction. That night, I drove to the lake near my cabin and sat by the frozen water. The stars shimmered faintly above, and the wind moved across the surface in small, whispering waves. I thought about the years I had spent trying to hold a family together, about the weight of loyalty that was never returned. Then for the first time I said it out loud to the dark. "I'm done." The words didn't feel harsh, they felt freeing. They were the kind of truth you say once and never have to repeat. The next morning I met with Raj again. He had seen the article too. "You can press charges," he said, matter of fact. "It's a violation of the settlement terms." I nodded slowly but didn't answer right away. The thought of another legal fight felt exhausting. "Not this time," I finally said. "Let her talk. I don't need to defend myself anymore." Raj studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. "That's its own kind of victory." When I left his office, the air outside felt different, lighter somehow. I realized that every time I'd chosen silence, I hadn't been retreating. I'd been reclaiming peace in pieces, one quiet decision at a time. That night, I turned off my phone again. I lit a single candle on my desk and developed a new set of film from a recent trip, a fox in mid-run snow, spraying around it, eyes sharp and wild. I watched the image appear slowly on paper, the room tinted red from the darkroom light. That moment, that stillness, was mine alone. I knew the noise might return someday, another post, another story, another reason for them to reach across the distance. But I also knew I didn't owe anyone a response. I had learned to hold my own peace like a boundary made of light. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and unhurried. I watched it from the window, feeling no anger, no sadness, just the steady comfort of knowing I could finally stand without flinching. Whatever came next, it would start and end with me. The world had grown quieter since that spring. My schedule was steady again, early mornings in the woods, long days in the studio, quiet dinners with Mia after hours of editing. It felt like life had finally settled into something, even something that no longer shifted beneath my feet. My memoir was in production at Cedarline Press, and my editor, Michael Grant, had become a calm presence through the entire process. He spoke in the same tone whether he was discussing contracts or cover colors. "Your story isn't about photography," he said once. "It's about endurance. People will see themselves in it." The first printed proofs arrived that summer. I remember opening the box and running my fingers over the matte cover, my name in small letters at the bottom, the title in white, above a photo of an owl in flight. I'd taken that picture years ago, the same night I'd stood in my darkroom after being thrown out of my father's house. Seeing it now on a book cover felt like a quiet kind of full circle. Cedarline planned a small launch in Burlington. Nothing grand, just a bookstore reading a Q&A and a local press feature. I wasn't used to being in front of an audience, but I agreed. The evening came, and I stood under warm yellow lights, surrounded by shelves that smelled of paper and cedar oil. When I finished reading a short passage, the crowd clapped softly. One woman in the front row, her gray hair pulled into a braid, raised her hand and asked, "Do you still talk to your family?" I hesitated before answering. "No," I said simply. "Sometimes peace costs distance." The room was quiet for a moment, and then she nodded like she understood. Afterward, Michael handed me a cup of tea and said, "You handled that beautifully." I smiled faintly. "It's strange," I said, "telling my story out loud when it started with being silenced." He nodded. "That's how healing sounds." For a while, it felt like healing really had found me. Sales grew slowly but steadily. My workshops were booked months ahead. Brands that had once left came back. Every day felt like another small piece of my life falling back into place. But peace, I'd learned, rarely stays untouched. It was late August when a letter arrived forwarded from the publisher. No return address. I almost tossed it with the junk mail, but something about the neat handwriting made me pause. Inside was a single page folded twice. "Dear Emily," it began, I read your book. I'm proud of you. There was no signature, just a final line written in a familiar slanted hand. I wish we'd learned to listen sooner, Mom. I stared at the page for a long time, tracing the ink where her pen must have paused. It was the first real acknowledgement I'd received from anyone in my family since the court case. I placed the letter on my desk and sat with it until the light outside dimmed into evening. That weekend, I drove to the coast, the same small cabin in Maine, where I'd gone months earlier. The air was warm, the tide low, the world painted in shades of blue and gold. I brought the letter with me, but didn't read it again. I left it folded in my notebook, letting the sea wind move around it. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a call from Raj. "I wanted to give you a heads up," he said. A reporter reached out asking about the lawsuit. "She's working on a feature about online defamation cases. She found your public record." I sighed. "Do I have to respond?" "No," he said. "But silence can be reshaped by others. It might be better if you speak for yourself this time." I thought about that all day. The idea of reopening old wounds made my stomach tighten. But maybe this wasn't reopening, it was setting the record straight. So when the reporter, a woman named Claire, called that evening, I agreed to a brief interview. She asked carefully worded questions: how it started, what it cost, what I'd learned. Her tone wasn't exploitative, just curious. When the article published 2 weeks later, I almost didn't read it. But Mia showed up at the studio holding a copy of the paper, smiling. "You should," she said. The headline read, "From Betrayal to Boundaries, One Woman's Quiet Stand." It told the story honestly, no exaggeration, no blame, just the truth. That same afternoon, an email arrived from an unknown address. The subject line read, "You were right." My stomach sank before I even opened it. The message was short. I shouldn't have done it. I thought the post would make people understand me, not destroy everything. I've been going to counseling. "I'm sorry, Emily. I really am." It was signed Abby. I sat at my desk for a long time, the cursor blinking beside her words. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know what to say that wouldn't reopen everything I'd already closed. I clicked archive and let it stay there. The next few weeks moved quietly. I finished recording the audiobook for Cedarline, and they scheduled a national release. The day the first official print run shipped, Michael called. "Congratulations," he said. "It's a remarkable book." Then he paused. "You've turned something painful into something people can hold in their hands. That's rare." That night I stood by the window watching the first autumn leaves fall onto the porch steps. I thought about all the versions of myself that had existed: the daughter who stayed silent, the woman who fought back, the person learning to rest. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was any one of them. I was all of them, finally whole. A week later, a small package arrived at the studio. Inside was a framed photograph, one I hadn't taken. It showed a simple country road at dusk, sunlight cutting through the trees. No note, just the image. I recognized the composition immediately. It was the kind my mother used to take before she gave up her camera to focus on the life my father wanted. I hung it on the wall across from my desk, next to the lioness photo I'd once tried to give my father. 2 images side by side, one from the beginning of my story, one from its quiet middle. When I looked at them together, I didn't feel anger anymore, just distance, like looking across a field at something that used to hurt, but now only belonged to memory. The next morning, I woke early to photograph the sunrise. The sky burned pink over the lake, the world hushed and waiting. I crouched low with my camera, the shutter clicking softly. For a brief moment, I thought of my mother watching light the same way years ago. Maybe she still did. As the first sunbeam hit the lens, I realized the truth of it all, that sometimes the only way to heal from what broke you is to build something beautiful where the pain used to live. By early winter, my book had quietly become something larger than I expected. Reviews began appearing in small magazines, then regional papers, and before long, a national morning show reached out asking for an interview. I almost said no, but Michael insisted. "You don't have to talk about the lawsuit," he said. "Just talk about resilience. People respond to honesty." So a week later, I found myself sitting in a softly lit studio in New York City. The host, a woman named Diane, greeted me with the kind of warmth that felt genuine. "Emily," she said, "your story has resonated with so many people, especially women who've been told their worth depends on pleasing others. What do you hope readers take away from your work?" I thought for a moment before answering. "That it's okay to walk away from what breaks you," I said. "You don't owe anyone your peace, even if they share your blood." Diane nodded slowly, her eyes kind. "That's a hard lesson," she said, "but it's one worth learning." The segment aired the next morning, and within hours my inbox filled again, but this time with something different. Messages from women in small towns, from men raising daughters, from teachers and artists who said the story helped them feel less alone. I read every one. For once, the noise was filled with light instead of cruelty. A week later, Michael called from the publisher's office. "You might want to sit down," he said, half laughing. "You're on the Times bestseller list." I sat at my desk, the phone pressed to my ear, staring out the window at a sky brushed with snow. "You're serious." "Completely," he said. "Congratulations, Emily. You've earned this." When I hung up, I didn't cheer. I just sat quietly letting it sink in. For years, I had been told that my work was small, unimportant, a hobby that wouldn't last. Now it was something people found strength in. That night, I opened a bottle of wine, poured a single glass, and toasted the silence that had once hurt me, but now protected me. 2 days later, Raj called. "You're going to want to hear this," he said. "Your sister's attorney reached out. She's requested a meeting." My stomach tightened. "What kind of meeting?" "Not legal," he said. "Personal. She says she wants to apologize face to face." I didn't answer right away. The idea of sitting across from Abby again felt strange, like revisiting a place that no longer existed. But after a long pause, I said, "All right, let's hear what she has to say." We met at a small coffee shop halfway between Burlington and their new home in Albany. Raj sat a few tables away, keeping his distance, but nearby. When Abby walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked older, somehow, tired, humbled. She carried no makeup, no phone in hand, no air of performance, just a small envelope and a nervous smile. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi." I nodded toward the chair across from me. She sat, hands clasped around her coffee cup. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she exhaled shakily. "I've been in therapy," she said, "for months now. I thought it would help me blame you less. Instead, it helped me see what I did." I stayed quiet, letting her speak. She fumbled with the envelope before sliding it across the table. "It's not much," she said. "Just a letter. I didn't want to send it over email. I wanted you to see it if you were ready. I didn't open it." "What made you reach out now?" I asked. She looked down. "Mom," she said quietly. "She showed me your book. I read it cover to cover in one night. I didn't expect to cry, but I did. You wrote about me without saying my name, and somehow that hurt less than I thought it would. You didn't make me a villain. You just told the truth." I stared at her for a long moment. Her eyes were red but steady. "You hurt me, Abby," I said softly, "in ways that don't fade." She nodded quickly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life knowing that, but I'm trying to be better now. I just needed you to hear that from me." There was nothing more to say. I stood and she followed. When she reached out, I hesitated before letting her hug me. It wasn't forgiveness, it was acknowledgement. When she pulled away, she whispered, "Thank you for not ruining me when you had the chance." As I drove home, I thought about her words. The road stretched long and quiet ahead, snow falling in slow, steady lines. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just felt a small, fragile peace that came not from reconciliation, but from release. When I got back to the studio, Mia was editing footage. She looked up when I walked in. "How did it go?" she asked. "Better than I expected," I said. She nodded. "That's something, isn't it?" I smiled faintly. "It's enough." Later that night, I finally opened the letter Abby had given me. It was handwritten, a little messy, but honest. "You were right to walk away. I used to think silence was cruelty, but now I see it was mercy. I hope someday we can meet again, not as enemies or sisters defined by pain, but as people who survived it. I folded it carefully and placed it beside my mother's earlier note in the same drawer. 3 pages now, 3 versions of love trying to find their way back in the only language they knew. The following month, Cedar Lane organized a second printing of my book. This time they asked if I wanted to include a dedication. I thought about it for days before sending the final line to Michael, for those who find peace not in being chosen, but in choosing themselves. When the new edition came out, I held it in my hands and traced the dedication with my thumb. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift not just from my shoulders, but from my name. That spring, I launched a scholarship program under Untamed Light, offering grants to young photographers who couldn't afford professional training. We named it the Wild Roots Fund. The first recipient was a 19-year-old girl from Ohio named Hannah, who had saved up to buy her first used camera. When she called to thank me, her voice trembled with disbelief. "You have no idea how much this means." I smiled. "I think I do." Watching her receive that grant reminded me of everything I'd fought for. Not fame, not vindication, but freedom. The freedom to create, to stand, to choose peace over pain every time. That night, I returned to my darkroom for the first time in months. The air smelled of old chemicals and dust. I hung a new photo on the drying line, a lioness again, this one older, her fur streaked with light, her eyes calm and knowing. When the image came into focus, I knew exactly what it meant. Some stories end not with applause or forgiveness, but with quiet endurance, the kind that turns surviving into something sacred. Outside, the first blossoms of spring were breaking through the last of the snow, and for the first time, I didn't look back. The following summer was warm and gentle, the kind that smelled of pine and rain. By then, Untamed Light had grown far beyond anything I'd imagined. My workshops filled months in advance. My book continued to find new readers, and the Wild Roots Fund had already helped 3 young photographers begin their own journeys. I still kept my life simple. I rose before sunrise, brewed my coffee, and walked the lake trail behind my studio with my camera slung across my shoulder. Some mornings the mist was so thick it looked like the world had been washed clean. One morning I paused on the trail where the trees opened toward the water. The air was cool against my skin, and the sun shimmered through the branches. A red fox appeared on the opposite bank, silent and alert. I lifted my camera, but then lowered it again. Not every moment needs to be captured. Some are meant to be felt. That realization, quiet and certain, was something I'd never understood before. Later that day, I found an envelope in my mailbox. The return address was from Florida. My father's handwriting was neat and deliberate, the kind that always looked like it belonged on business contracts. Inside was a short note. "Emily, your mother showed me your book. I read it twice. I didn't expect to, but I did. I don't know if you'll ever want to speak to me again, but I wanted you to know I see you now. Dad." I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. There was no apology, but there was recognition, and somehow that was enough. I didn't respond right away. Some wounds don't close with words, they fade quietly when you stop touching them. A few weeks later, I returned to my darkroom to finish developing a new series for the fall exhibit. I had been photographing animals in motion, small, fleeting moments that revealed strength without noise. As each image appeared in the tray, I felt something shift inside me. There was peace in the process again. The red glow of the light filled the room, and for the first time in years, it didn't remind me of solitude. It reminded me of possibility. That evening, I called Mia and told her I wanted to expand the scholarship program. "Add a mentorship piece," I said, "something where students can shadow us in the field." She smiled through the phone. "You really don't slow down, do you?" I laughed softly. I guess I finally learned what I was working toward. The next morning, I received an email from Abby. The subject line read, "Just wanted you to know." Inside was a photo of her standing outside a small, modest storefront with a for-lease sign replaced by "Open for Business." She'd launched a consulting firm. Nothing extravagant, nothing borrowed. Beneath the picture, she'd written, "Starting over isn't easy, but it's mine this time. Thank you for the example." I didn't reply, but I smiled. Sometimes grace travels quietly between people without needing acknowledgement. That fall, I hosted my largest outdoor workshop, yet 30 students spread across the forest, cameras clicking softly as leaves fell around us. I moved among them, answering questions, adjusting angles, teaching them how to wait for light instead of chasing it. When the day ended, one of the students asked, "How do you know when you've taken the right photo?" I thought for a moment, then said, "When you stop trying to prove anything and start just seeing what's in front of you." As the group packed up, I lingered a moment longer, watching the last light fade behind the trees. The sound of laughter drifted through the clearing, and I felt something deep and steady settle in my chest. It wasn't triumph. It was belonging to my work, my peace, my own life. That night I returned home and stood by the framed photos on my wall. The lioness still fierce and unflinching. The country road from my mother. Both carried the same quiet truth: survival can be loud, but healing rarely is. I traced the edges of each frame and whispered, "We made it." In the years that followed, the noise of the past faded entirely. My parents never became part of my daily life again, but every so often I'd get a card from my mother with a photo tucked inside a bird she'd spotted a sunset by the ocean. We never needed to name forgiveness. It lived quietly in those small gestures. Sometimes people ask me how I found the courage to keep going after being cast aside by my own family. The truth is simpler than it sounds. I stopped trying to be who they wanted me to be and became who I already was. The greatest justice isn't revenge or validation. It's peace, the kind you build with your own two hands when no one believes you can. If you're listening to this and you've ever had to walk away from people who couldn't see your worth, I hope you remember this. Peace is not given, it's chosen. And once you learn how to protect it, no one can take it from you again. Take care of yourself tonight. And if this story found you when you needed it, share it with someone else who might need the reminder too. You never know who's still learning that they're allowed to begin again.